Hello friends and warlords out there, my name is Rodge. I'm the host of Saga Thursday, your regular source for that Saga goodness. Today we're doing a battle report. So we have the awesome Book of Battles recently came out, so rejuvenated some interest in some battle reports on my end. So we've got quite a few fun scenarios to choose from here. I ended up choosing Ambush because I have some lovely monk baggage models that I wanted to use, and I believe there is another scenario that uses them, but Ambush. In this scenario, the players must seize the loot transported in the baggage train, but this baggage doesn't belong to either player and is trying to leave the table as quickly as possible. Often this scenario breaks down into two stages. The first consists of trying to seize the loot and battle the wagon's defenders, and the second sees the players trying to defend their ill-gotten gains. So yeah, that's pretty much how our battle broke down, I would say, in the end. So let's take a look at our battlefield here. So we've got our monks here. They're going to be trying to scoot along the center of the table here. And they're going to roll a dice each turn that kind of determines how they're going to do that. So if you don't roll high, they don't move, but kind of rest and get rid of their fatigues. And then if you roll higher, they might move. And if you roll the highest, they could move and get rid of their fatigues. So the fatigues are very nice on them. It's kind of tricky to take these little bastards out. And so let's get into the baggage rules, I guess. So these rules are used in a different scenario as well, so there's some additional rules that I'm not really going to touch on, but these are kind of NPCs in this particular battle. So they're armor 5, 6 against shooting. They do have aggression 3. They will never charge anybody, but if they bump into somebody in this scenario, they will give that unit a fatigue. So you can, I guess, sort of block them up here, but you're going to take a fatigue on your guys, so that may or may not be part of your little plan. So the kind of interesting thing about these guys, they do have hard cover against shooting, so they're kind of tricky to take out. They are, I cannot see a reason why they cannot close ranks. So they're always going to be blocking out 4s essentially. Most times there's no reason you wouldn't be closing ranks when your enemy is coming in. I mean, you only have 3 attacks, so going to 1 isn't that big of a hindrance. For this particular scenario, the key thing is Saga abilities cannot be triggered during a melee involving a baggage. So this makes it actually really tricky to take these guys out, at least on the first try, because if we think about it, you're going to, if you close ranks, you need to do 4 wounds to get through 3 resilience, and so right there you're going to need 8 wounds to get through, and if they're armor 5, you're going to need 24 attacks, which is an unusually high number, especially if you cannot use Saga abilities. So having abilities that affect the unit before the charge could be extremely useful here. The Anglo-Danes have one that actually comes into play. If you have Dane axes or javelins, those are especially useful here as well, because you get all the upside of the extra attack power and none of the downside, because these guys aren't really fighting back that well. So I think those units will be especially useful to you if you are playing this scenario. And I think for these 10 scenarios in the rule book here, I think you do want to know that you're going to be playing them ahead of time, because it's going to affect your weapon options and the troops that you take. So I think that's an important point to consider and something to keep in mind if you are playing this scenario. So let's move along here. So again, this is the board that we ended up with. A quick note on terrain here. So we included, you can see a little a low wall here. So we included that there just basically so I could talk about it. It's called an obstacle. If you remember in Saga version 1, they were seen as unmanly type creations. It just encouraged players to move up to the wall and hunker down and not move out. And nobody wanted to charge the wall then because they counted the cover, so just not a lot of fun. So they just took out the rules for that, but they are back, I think, more for completeness sake of having these rules. One thing is they're not in the terrain generator for the scenarios, so we're kind of using this as an exception here just to be able to talk about it. So wall obstacles they're just short or medium long. They're thin like this. They essentially count as impassable and blocking if they're high, and if they're low, then it kind of counts as just hard cover. If the majority of your guys are behind it, you can move up your guys touching the wall, and then if an enemy comes in and touches the wall, you count as being in hard cover, and you guys can fight even though technically you're not touching. There's probably a little bit more to that, but that is essentially the gist of it. So for this scenario, we kind of just put the terrain down. Weren't really thinking too much about it. I want to make an interesting battle. If you were playing this, and I think we're going to have a lot of commentary like this throughout the battle report. The battle itself is not too interesting. It's definitely a different way to play Saga, but it should create some good discussion about what you want to do when you're playing this scenario. So I think what you definitely want to do is this middle area is open terrain. Nobody can put stuff there, but you definitely want to put some terrain down on the opponent's side, kind of blocking as best you can. Obviously, you have to have a medium distance between those terrain pieces, but you want to put the biggest piece of terrain you can right down, kind of blocking immediately, I think, is a way to kind of slow the action down a bit. So we were wide open. So there are no troops. This is actually the deployment phase, I guess, because your troops are going to move on to the table. And this is a 4x4, so our deployment zones, or the edge of the table, that actually starts here. And you're going to see I forget that and rectify it after my first turn here. But so you got your typical Saga 3x4. Your guys are going to move on during the first turn, which is interesting because you're not going to generate Saga die, but your kind of double and triple moves are going to be severely limited unless you have special rules to go with your guys. So yeah, don't be like us and leave it open. Put some terrain down to block your opponent's advance and make it a little more interesting. I think that may be why this game went so particularly quick. So I set up first, and these guys essentially moved onto the table, and you can see the edge of the table is actually right here. So in a short pick or two here, I will rectify that, and essentially they'll be in the same formation but just further along. Our monks here, they move at the start of each player's turn, so they can go up to 12 inches per turn, so they could get across in 4 turns. It's not particularly likely, but it could happen. So let's delve into my army further. You can't really see what's going on here. I'll probably describe in a later photo. If you do want to see more pics of these guys, I do have a video, The Men of Wessex. I do have an addition to the warband, which is these handsome fellas right here. These are some figs I picked up off eBay and rebased them to fit my basing scheme, and you can see they fit in right well. So these are the Gaul Gail mercenaries, so I want to take the opportunity to chat about these guys a little bit. So my friend here that I'm playing is Matt. He's playing Scots. Guess I should mention that. And he only had 4 points of painted guys. And I'm like, well, we got to do 6. We need a nice meaty report here. So I have these guys. I'll bring them over. You can use them. And you can see they're on my Anglo-Danes side here. And what happened was he actually scrounged up some additional models from a buddy. And we'll see those. So he didn't actually need them. So I'm like, well, these guys can fight for the Anglo-Danes, and they got some nice hitting power, and I think they might do well for this particular scenario. So what the heck, I will throw these guys in, and they worked out pretty well. I'm glad I threw them in here, but we can take a look at the rules. So their name means foreign Gael. They are descendants of the Vikings who settled in Ireland and married the local women. They inherited their ferocity and taste for plunder from their ancestors. Pirates and mercenaries, they frequently raided the English coast, sowing death and desolation. But we have hired these fellows on, and they're big juicy rule here is Sons of Death. This unit is composed of 8 warriors. They have an aggression of 2 in melee if they charge, otherwise it is 1. So that is a huge ability in and of itself. You can't think of a lot of Saga abilities, for example, that would just give you essentially 8 attack dice for a unit outright. At least the boards that that I play. So that's a huge ability. They do have some more interesting stuff here. They have a rule called Savagery. They cannot be activated if another friendly unit has been activated during the current activation phase. Their activations are always free, but they cannot rest unless exhausted. They can never close ranks. So not closing ranks, not super big deal. Essentially what this means is they always have to be the first unit to activate on your turn. You do everything you're going to do with them, and then you're done, essentially. Their activations are free, so it seems pretty awesome. So the opponent is left with a tricky choice to just let them do essentially whatever it is they're going to do. Because if they strip fatigue off them to reduce their effectiveness or what have you, slow them down, they're just going to be able to keep activating. You're never going to run out of activations with these guys. And the more charge activations, the better, really. They have an aggression of 2 so on the charge. So really you don't want them to be charging you multiple times. It's better to just, in my opinion, it's going to be situational depending on what Saga abilities you have queued up, but probably better to let them just do whatever the heck they want to do for one solid combat and then let them exhaust themselves. The FAQ actually adds a couple clarifications for these guys, which I can say that they look pretty good out the gate. The addendum for Savagery is if one of their activations is canceled for any reason, including a failed charge, they may not be activated anymore during the current turn. So that kind of makes sense. If you cancel their activation, they could just keep going again. So it wouldn't exactly be fair. So if they're exhausted, essentially if they have 2 fatigues now, you could shut them down, but they'll be fresh in the following turn. So yeah, interesting fellas. The last rule, an eye for an eye, a little stab in the guts here. After both units rolled their attack dice, the Gaul Gail inflict a number of automatic hits on the enemy unit equal to half the number of hits that have been inflicted on them. So even when you go after them on their turn and they're not charging, they can't close ranks, they seem vulnerable, they will stick you in the end. The fact clarifies this to it can't exceed half the number of Gaul Gail figures in the unit. So it's actually going to cap at 4 if you have the full 8. And if you only have a couple guys left, it's only going to be 1 or 2 hits at the most. So that makes sense. It doesn't, I can see a previous scenario where you send in 8 Hearthguard, a boatload of attacks. You can't really constrain yourself and ended up doing like 8 hits to yourself. Could be terrible. So that makes sense. It makes it commensurate with the number of figures in the unit. So some good fact changes there. I'm okay with that for this particular battle here. Okay, so here we are. We have rectified our deployment mistake. And on the end here, I've got, these are 6 warriors with just hand weapon shield. I've got 4 warriors behind them. I've got the Gaul Gail in the middle. I've got 6 Hearthguard. Did I say Hearthguard? These are Hearthguard here. 6 Hearthguard with Dane axes. So as we mentioned, these guys will be particularly useful. I've got another 4-pack of warriors generating Saga dice. I don't think they're going to do much in this game. I've got my Warlord with my Dane axe. And we've got 8 warriors. They jumped the obstacle here. So that is the extent of our interaction with that particular obstacle. And the way they were able to do this is they're able to move up and couldn't quite get across it because it does reduce your movement to short. But the Warlord has his We Obey rule, so I was able to get a second activation. So these guys actually have a fatigue on them over here. So when you move on, you don't generate Saga dice. You get a free move, essentially, and you would need special rules or something to do more activations. So these guys were able to use We Obey. The Gaul Gail actually had unlimited activation, so I could have ran these guys way the heck out there. I didn't really seem like a good idea. Maybe in this battle it didn't matter, but a unit like this could be particularly useful, I guess, for getting out there during the early turns and blocking these guys up. So not too shabby. Matt's Scots are going to be moving on to the board here. So you can see his forces. He's got 8 warriors, 6 Hearthguard, warlords hanging out back there, 8 warriors stuck in the woods, and 6 mounted Scots. So these guys are an interesting choice. So he was figuring for this scenario having some additional movement would be handy, and 2 of the best Scot abilities, counterattack and wall of spears, don't actually require your guys to be on foot or fighting defensively. So I think having a unit, a mounted unit, is just powerful. You knew he was going to play against my Anglo-Danes. I didn't have any shooting. So having a unit like that, I think, could provide some real utility. For this particular scenario, it's not going to turn out. We were kind of using the Book of Battles PDF that the creator sent me. So we're kind of just reading things as we went along, looking up stuff as we needed to. And the way that these baggages work, I told you how they fought. The way that you claim them is if you essentially kill them, you will gain an objective token, and your unit's going to hold on to that, and they can carry it around for the rest of the game. However, they count as being in difficult terrain, so it's going to reduce your movement to short, and if you're horsemen, you're going to gain a fatigue every time you move, so it's particularly brutal. They do mention that, yeah, it sucks for horsemen, and he does mention that you cannot trade the objective marker among your units because they are very proud about claiming it and they don't want to share. So that makes sense. So he will have the mobility to get out here potentially, but he just once he has them, he's going to be shut down pretty hard, and it's going to be tougher for him to escape with those guys without being vulnerable. For the victory conditions, I didn't really get into it, but you need to essentially capture these guys. They're worth 6 points each, and you're going to add those points to your survival points, which is the number of guys you have left at the end of the battle. And it's kind of a slightly nuanced difference for massacre points. I'll get into that towards the end of the video, but essentially you're going to have to capture whoever gets 2 out of 3 of these is most likely going to win by a fair margin. You only need to win by 2 points, so that's probably the main goal here. And so let's get on with that. Some shots of Matt's forces here and some closer look at my monks. They're defending. Each one has a little treasure chest that they're holding on to. These are the gripping beast monks. Some Scottish forces gazing upon the battlefield. All right, my first go. So this is going to be a battle kind of light on saga abilities and more focused on maneuvers and activations. So take a look at my board. I just have a couple of defensive abilities queued up. Now, at the beginning, I mentioned that you cannot use saga abilities in combat with these fellows. I believe that we forget that at some point. I know for the first combat, we look it up. My Gaul Gail are going to get into combat, so I can't use them anyways. But I believe we forget that later on, but I don't really think it affects much, but we shall see. So moving along here onto my second turn out of 5. So this is a quick game to play. The first one's just moving on, so it's essentially a 4-turn game. So this dude, he's making a run for it, leaving his buddies behind. I'm putting himself right in front of my Gaul Gail, and I end up going in with those guys. It's going to believe I'd be a double activation to do that. And I just did the ones right in front with multiple activations. I could have maybe gone after this guy over here and let my other guys go for these close unit, but we'll see how that works out. So the Gaul Gail, like I said, you need an unusually powerful unit to really get these guys in one swoop, but that's kind of dependent on closing ranks. So Matt here is deathly afraid of the Gaul Gail, so he actually decided not to close ranks and keep the 3 attacks to see if he could knock down one or two of these guys, and it actually, well, it works out for both of us. He does do a wound, and I did manage to do the 4 wounds necessary to take him out. And we're using these continental dice here. These are some continental monks that we have captured. So 2nd fatigue on the Gaul Gail. And this is kind of the disposition of the forces, as we can see. So I'm going to just move these guys back, and you can see I just moved the short there. So it's at that point that we realized that they were slowed down. So that is the end of these guys. They're exhausted now, so I need to move my forces up and kind of surround these guys as best I can. So we kind of create a little wall. There's a little goal there. But hopefully the horsemen will go after these guys, and I will be able to further create a little wall of meat shields around my mercenaries there. So this is how the battlefield looks from Matt's side. This is his board here. So he does queue up wall of spears and counterattack and a bunch of activation. So I believe he does use the wall of spears when he's engaged with the baggage there, but it's not going to matter too much. He goes in, even when he popped that ability, it wasn't quite enough. So on average, like I said, you need 24 attacks to get through if they close ranks, which I do. And it looks like he only did 1 wound, and then I take a fatigue after the combat. So with only 12 attacks, and he probably ended up, I don't think he rolled very well for Wall of Spears, so maybe at 14, 15 attacks. He's just going to wear them down. And that's probably how most of these battles are going to go in this particular scenario. It's going to be really tough to get these guys outright. And Matt's moving some fellas up on this side here. One thing is these baggage count as enemy for both of us, so it is going to stop his guys from maneuvering from about 12 inches out. So he's going to have to use activation dice to really get his guys into the fray here. And that is essentially it. It's my turn again. So he never went back against this guy. So he's got 2 fatigues. And this guy, he's making a break for it across my lines here. And taking a look at my board, I left some dice on from last time, so I'm really able to load it up. And yeah, I do have the shock ability here, which will come in handy because it's not a saga ability that is used in the melee, it's used beforehand. So it's going to stop him from closing ranks. So it's going to be particularly useful here because, okay, so I have to do the Gaul Gail first. We're going to rest up, and I believe we're just going to hang out. And then my Dane Axers are going to go in here. So with my +1 to hit, 12 attacks, and he cannot close ranks, I actually have a pretty decent chance here. I may have used the determination, even though we weren't supposed to get a few extra attacks. We'll be able to see that if that's still on my board for next time. Apologize for the rules snafus. And with that, I managed to take him out. He does kill one of the Hearth Guard, but I claim that objective, and I scooch back to my lines with it. So you can see here, going first is a pretty big advantage. I don't think it's game breaking because we're going to see that going second actually might be better because you get the last turn at the end of the game. And I think that's probably what I would shoot for if you're playing second. It's going to be really tough to block your opponent from getting the second one if he doesn't, if you don't have cavalry or any kind of interference type abilities, which are probably most factions, especially in the Viking Age. So this one might be more interesting scenario in the Crusades era. But so you're probably going to get the second objective first as the first player, and it's going to be up to you to defend it. So depending on your board, you may or may not be up for a challenge there. So let's move along. I'm going to create a little wall of bodies here. My Hearthguard and warriors gumming up the lines on the front there, and Got my warriors moving in, completing the wall of bodies, protecting my 2 objectives here. So it's it's an interesting way to play Saga. You probably don't want to play this every game of Saga, but after doing the Clash of Warlords so many times, it's fun just kind of doing something different, more objective based. So on Matt's turn, he is determined to go after that last monk there. So I believe he rested up, dropped the fatigue. So he's going to put his Hearthguard in. After you can see, he moved his Hearthguard mana guys over here. So at this point, realized it wasn't a good idea for those guys to try and take him out. So he's got his foot guys going in, and they are repulsed. Only 12 attacks. It's not going to cut the snuff, but he is fully exhausted, fatigued now. So Matt's Warlord can go in there. And unfortunately, a couple saves on my part, and he is repulsed. So some bad luck there on Matt's part. He should have gotten him at that point. He moves up some of his other guys over here, as you can see. And he puts the Warlord in again, even though he is fatigued. And finally, he convinces that monk that it will be in his best interest to surrender that treasure chest. So at that point, that's kind of the end of Matt's turn. He's in a pretty decent position. His Warlord is, I think he's just got 2 fatigues on him right there. But he's surrounded by Hearthguard, so even though he has the objective, it's going to be tough to go after them. Now, to get that objective, all you have to do is win combat, actually. But getting it from a Warlord is going to be tough because he can bounce the wounds, he has resilience, and those essentially count as not doing any wounds at all. So you're never actually going to really be able to win combat against the Warlord unless you actually kill him. So there isn't really a reason to try and maybe throw these warriors in or anything like that. So on my turn, this is kind of another top-down view of the action. This is my board. So Termination is still queued up there, so I didn't actually use it on my turn, remember that. But queuing up a bunch of Hearthguard activations here, and these defensive abilities kind of been riding throughout. Okay, the Gaul Gail activate first. So I decided to pull him back. At this point, I'm kind of feeling like this is going to be the end of the battle here. This is my 3rd turn, I believe. First, second, third. Actually, I think it's the 4th turn. Yeah, first turn I moved up. Second turn I grabbed these. Third turn I grabbed this one. And now it's the 4th turn. So there's only one more turn after this. Rest up my Hearthguard here. Proceed to move them over. So if we go back, it looks like I used the full order stick here. So it should have been a short because these guys have a fatigue. You guys caught me cheating. Cheating again. Trying to get these guys out of the way. Decided to throw my warriors into his Hearthguard. I want to fatigue him up a little bit before I drop the hammer with my Hearthguard that are essentially standing right next to them. Just beats the piss out of my warriors, which I guess isn't to be expected. I do kill 2 of his fellows, which is nice. He kills 5 warriors, so that's kind of annoying. I'm not going to be generating a Saga die any longer. But I'm able to put my warriors in. I believe I pop, like rocks here, rerolling defense dice, and just wipe them out with not losing a single guy. So that's pretty awesome. It's going to put another fatigue on the Warlord and his other Hearthguard guys back here. At this point, I forgot that these guys were Hearthguard. I thought these were warriors because I'm going to go into that Warlord, baby. And I thought that I could kill him. He's exhausted. Maybe win the combat, grab the objective. So doesn't quite work that way when you got some Hearthguards here. He's got plenty of meat shields. You probably need to do like 8 or 9 attacks to really kill him, even though he's exhausted. At this point, would have 2 fatigues when I go in. So he leaves those on there. We bounce off. I think I did kill 1 guy. But like I said, you're going to have to really actually kill the Warlord. So the Warlord is actually pretty good for going after the objectives, just based off that reason alone, that he's going to be hard to sneak it back. Because most units, you go in and you can just stack up the board and win a combat and snag it back, but not in this situation here. So I think that takes up most of my dice. So my little screen here is getting a little weaker. So let's see what Matt gets up to on his turn. So he's actually not going to press forward here. So he's got 2 defensive Saga abilities queued up here essentially. So he's kind of reverting to the Scots defensive tactics. And at this point, I think this is probably what's going to cost him the game here. I had an exhausted Hearthguard unit. This unit's down to 3. He could pop these guys, put a fatigue on my Warlord, just really hammer these guys. He's got 2 relatively fresh units. These warriors would be fresh. I don't think he rolled any rares, which maybe that was kind of causing him to hold back. He really likes Wall of Spears, which does cost a rare. But instead of pressing his potential advantage here, he decides to consolidate his lines and brace for a counterattack from me and not really go after the objectives. So, yeah, that's kind of where we leave his turn 4. So he's actually got 1 more turn after this. So I'm going to queue up my defensive abilities as best I can and try and consolidate my lines, resting my guys up, pulling back. See, my focus is right here. So on Matt's last turn, he actually has a play right here to go after this unit of Hearthguard, and that's exactly what he does. So we deliberate on his last turn over what Saga abilities are best. I didn't snap a pic of it, it seems, but he didn't roll too great, so I think he just had maybe Wall of Spears up when he went in. So this is why going second actually, I think might be better than going first, because you can see where the opponent comes on, react to that. If you have speedy units, you can kind of slow them down potentially, but being able to, on the last turn, go after a unit with everything you got and don't care about your unit sitting completely surrounded by the enemy, with 1 guy left. You do not care about that attack back. All you need to do is just win the combat. So the Scots aren't super set up for it. It's going to be a triple activation for these guys to get in. So he's going to be fatigued going in. I've got determination, like rocks, re-rolling. So even with the battle of the boards here, everything queued up. He's going in here, moving them in. What's going to happen? And so he loses 4 guys, and I lose 2 here. And I maintain the objective. So he actually had a shot at the end there. So this game, this is essentially how it's going to end up after turn 5 here. So you can see really a different game of Saga. And if every scenario is like this, it should be pretty fun. Just kind of mixing it up. Defensive armies are kind of on the back foot here, where maybe they kind of had the advantage in the just the main book scenario, because there's nothing really encouraging you to move out per se. You can just hunker down and wait for the enemy to come at you. So I like scenarios that get the enemy moving out there and getting into the fray, even when it's not necessarily fully mixing with their board. So this scenario is pretty fun. I think if you played it again, it would be even more tactical with the terrain placements, the way that we move, and everything else like that. And should be a cool scenario to play. So as far as the victory conditions, I do have 2 of the guys here, so it's kind of a foregone conclusion, but I wanted to talk about survival points. And essentially, most games use massacre points. So you get points for killing the enemy. Survival points are points for maintaining your own units. But in games of Saga, a lot of times you're peace trading frequently. Like you you're going to spend your guys, how do you explain it? Usually to kill a point of the enemy, you almost have to spend a point of your guys, essentially to kill those guys. And, with your abilities, you can try to make that trade more even. But games of Saga are really bloody. So survival points actually work out quite similar in the end. And I tallied it both ways, but we can get into that. So you get 2 points for the hero surviving, 1 point for each Hearthguard, half points for warriors, third for the levy, 1 point if it generates a Saga die. So that's kind of interesting difference for massacre points. Massacre points, you get an extra point if you kill a unit. If the survival point, I guess the threshold is, if Hearthguard live, you get that point. If you weaken the warriors down to less than 4, that's going to be kind of a point of contention right there. The value of surviving mercenaries are halved. After all, you're quite pleased some of them died, and you don't need to pay them. So that makes sense. So, Matt was just playing strategically, letting the Gaul Gail get away in those early turns, and then deduct 1 point from your total for each unit, which was eliminated. 3 points of his legendary units, so that's a pretty big hit. So the Merc units, I think it's 2 extra points for massacre points if you kill these guys. So it's kind of, there's extra points for legendary units, so it kind of works out to be a similar point strata in the end. But I did calculate it both ways. So in addition to this, for the scenario, we got 6 points for each objective that we had. So the Scots ended up with 27 survivor points. That includes 6 for having the one, lost my marker there, one objective there, and essentially they lost 1 unit of Hearthguard, which was a pretty big swing for this. So they end up with 21 plus 6 is 27. The Anglo-Danes ended up with 37 wonderful survivor points. So I had 25 from the actual forces that I had left. I didn't actually lose a unit, so that worked to my advantage. And then 12 points for having the 2 fellas over here. And so without that, it would have been 25 to 22. So based off these troops, it is a pretty close battle. You only need to win by 2 for this scenario, so it would have been a win regardless. If we tabulated up for victory points, the Danes would have had 10 victory points from the Scots that they killed, and the Scots would have had 6 victory points from the Danes that they killed. So you can see it's slightly different, but essentially still a close battle. So the difference for massacre points was 4 versus 3 in survival points. So yeah, good fight here. Thanks to Matt for getting the game in. That is going to be the end of this episode here. Thanks for watching, liking, subscribing. If you have any questions about what you saw during the battle, please let me know. I do miss some stuff or forget to mention things. So if you did spot, I think I spotted all the rules mistakes that we made. But if you spot other ones, please let me know. I can comment below and let you know if I just forgot to mention that, or perhaps if that was a genuine error. So hopefully you guys learn a lot from this battle. Not a super interesting or particularly bloody battle. We're just playing to the objectives, and it's kind of cool to play a game of Saga that way. And hopefully you enjoyed watching. Definitely want to try to get more of these battles. I'd like to do all, I think, 10 of the main battles and run the essentially scenario generator a bunch of times, and perhaps even get some of the narrative games in at some point. So thank you everyone for watching. I'm going to catch you guys on the next one. Have a great week. Saga!